This morning we're going to take a look in our Bibles, and we're going to read about the Hebrews who went into the land of Egypt in order to escape a great famine. And as a result of Pharaoh's refusal to let them let go, God strikes Pharaoh's household with a great plague, and he releases the Hebrews. And they leave Egypt blessed with riches far greater than they came in with, that they had taken from the Egyptians. From there on, they journey into the promise. They leave Egypt and they begin to journey into the promised land. Now, you're probably expecting me to say that we're going to turn to the book of Exodus, because that's where that all happens, right? Well, actually, there's another story where that exact sequence of events happens, and it's not in the book of Exodus. It's in, you guessed it, the book of Genesis. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 12 this morning. Genesis chapter 12. And of course, the Hebrews that I'm talking about are not the children of Jacob and all of their extended families, but Abram, Sarai, Lot, and the rest of their household. Genesis chapter 12, we're going to start in verse 10. We're actually going to read up to chapter 13, verse 4. Now, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it happened, as he drew near to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Now, behold, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and it will be that when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please, say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me. So that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you." Now, it happened when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore, he treated Abram well because of her. And sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels came into his possession. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for myself as a wife? So now, here's your wife, take her and go." So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on in his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. So, I hope you can see that there's some very interesting parallels between this sequence of events and the one that we do have that we're more familiar with in Exodus, where the people go in as a whole, and Pharaoh tries to hold on to them and only lets go after God sends these plagues upon the people, upon his household. Now, what I want for us to understand about Abraham, and one of the reasons I think studying his life is so important for us as Christians is because after we get out of the Pentateuch, we start reading in Joshua and Judges, we start reading in the books of Samuel, we start reading in the prophets, the system has totally changed. At that point, we're reading about a system operating under the law of Moses. This system with sacrifices and festivals, and it's very, very organized. But during the time of Abraham and his family, it's not organized in quite the same way. And it's interesting when we look in the New Testament, we look in Romans chapter 4, for example, the Christian system really has more in common, at least structurally, has more in common with that of Abraham, the patriarchal system, than it does with the law of Moses. The way Abraham is saved is by faith. He's not worrying about offering up these specific sin offerings on a certain day of the year. There's not this whole system, this Day of Atonement that he has to go through. He is just trying to live by faith, which is what we're called to do as Christians. Now, there are specifics along the way for Abraham, just as there are specifics along the way for us. But to me, that makes his life just a little bit richer as we study it as Christians. And so that's kind of what I want for us to think about whenever we study through Abraham's life. As we go through Abraham's life, we see these ups and downs, and it's very cyclical. There's these really high points where, like at the beginning of this chapter, God comes to Abram and he makes these great promises and blessings to him. And then we have this narrative where Abram totally drops the ball on this. He's given a few tests. He does not handle them well at all. In the next chapter, he has this fight with his nephew, and he handles that spectacularly. In chapter 14, he even goes and rescues Lot and receives this blessing from Melchizedek. And in chapter 15, he has this covenant that's cut with God again. Just in time for chapter 16, all comes crashing down with Hagar. It's these ups and downs, and that's exactly what we experience. That's the reality of being a Christian. What we want to happen is, we start off with a little bit of faith, and we start growing, and we just keep growing, and we get better, and everything is just always getting better. And our relationship with God, we're always getting closer to Him. But that's not the reality of it. That's not how that really happens. We have places where we are getting closer, and we're doing so well, and we're praying all the time, and we're studying, and we're growing, and we feel the richness of our faith. And then, just like that, it seems, where did it all go? What happened? We make some foolish decisions. We do things that are stupid. We don't trust in God. We stop praying. We feel our faith shrinking. And then hopefully, we get back up and we start growing again. And that's kind of the reality of it. I'm not saying that that's how we want it to be. I'm not saying that excuses those lapses in our faith and in our righteousness. But that is the reality, and that is what we experience. And seeing Abram go through those same things hopefully encourages us and helps us to see the patience of God and the mercy and the grace that He has with us as we do grow. Because God knows, even through this whole time, Abram isn't giving up on God. He never totally lets go and abandon. He doesn't walk away from God. But we do have a low point in his life here. I found this quote from Warren Wiersbe, who said, this is very short, tests often follow triumphs. And I think that's very true. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, Paul encouraged the Christians there to watch out, to be careful. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. Just when you seem and you feel like you're the strongest spiritually is when you're in the most danger of tripping. And again, that's exactly what happens to Abram here. In verse 10, it says that there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down into Egypt. Now, what is it that God has told him to do? God told him to go from his father's house, go from his land. Remember, he and his family were living in Haran at the time. To leave there and go to the land that I will show you. In other words, I'm going to tell you where to go. I'm going to tell you where to go. And he guides him into the land of Canaan. He lives in the land. He builds this altar there. That's chapter 12, verse 7. He built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And God tells him in that same verse, I'm going to give this land to your seed, to your descendants. So there's no real reason in Abram's mind to think that God expects for him to leave this land. The way everything is recorded is very intentional. Sometimes we say, well, maybe God said more things that we don't know about. Maybe, but if there were important details like that, they would be included. It's very carefully written. So the fact that God doesn't ever tell him to leave this land, God tells him, I'm going to give you instruction. Just wait for my positive statements of instruction. Go where I tell you to go. And we see Abram with no word from the Lord leave the land where he was sent to. Leave that land, go into Egypt. He isn't being obedient. He isn't trusting in God. He isn't seeking out God's instruction anymore. He isn't following what he was told to do. He isn't trusting in God's providence during this famine. I don't know why this famine occurred. There are lots of different reasons why that might be. We know in 12 verse 9, it says, Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. I don't know what it was like at that time, but the Negev, the southern portion of Canaan, is mostly desert. When we read about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, that's basically the area where they were wandering, was in this Negev region. It's basically just desert. I'm not saying it was always that way. I don't know what the climate was like at that time. But it's very possible that this was not a permanent famine, but something very, very transient. It's possible that it had more to do with the terrain and the area he was living in than with the actual circumstances. But that is the first test. The first test that he faces after coming into the land is the test of circumstance. Abram, how are you going to handle when things get a little bit tight, when things get a little bit difficult? It doesn't say he's dying. It says the famine was severe in the land, but there's nothing to indicate that he's truly forced to do this. And he really fails this test. He decides to go into the land. We're going to see why a little bit later, some of the long-term effects this is going to have. But he decides to come into the land of Egypt. Then verses 11 through 13, we have this scheme. He has a plan. I don't know why he comes up with this plan. But he tells his wife, when we get to Egypt, they're going to see how beautiful you are. Now, mind you, she's an old woman. Okay? Now, I should be careful saying things about age around here. So I won't talk about how old she was, but relatively speaking, she's an older woman. Probably not someone you would expect for the king to seek out and bring into his harem. But that's what Abram is worried about. He says they're going to see how beautiful you are. She must be a very beautiful woman, mind you. They're going to see how beautiful you are. And they're going to kill me because I'm the husband. And I'm the only thing stopping them from taking you. So let's just say that we're brother and sister. And if we do this, then instead of killing me, they'll barter with me. Because now I'm still in charge of you, but they don't have to kill me to take you. We can, maybe we can make a deal here. Well, first off, this is incredibly selfish. He says in verse 13, please say that you are my sister, so it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you. He's very much concerned about himself right now. He doesn't seem concerned about his wife at all. He isn't concerned about Lot or the impression this is going to make. He isn't concerned about the consequences of any of this. And it seems he's perfectly willing to just trade his wife away, at least for a little bit. Sometimes you shake your head and you wonder. But at the same time, we do stupid things ourselves. And the point here is that Abram is concerned about a situation that may or may not ever occur. Now, it does occur, but it may or may not. And before it ever happens, he's already willing to give up his morality. He's already willing to make these moral sacrifices. He's already willing to lie and connive about these things before anything even happens. He's that much of a worrier that his worrying has led him to determine to sin when the time comes. That's what's happened here. Well, he fails that test for sure. Then verses 14 through 16, when he's actually in the land, we see what happens. It happened that when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. So it turns out he was right. They did make this observation. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. I guess he has scouts for his harem. I don't know if that was normal or not, but they saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Now, mind you, this isn't something that just happened. Right? They didn't take her forcefully. How do we know that? Because look at what it says. Therefore, he treated Abram well because of her. He gives Abram a dowry. And sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels came into his possession. That's a pretty big gift there. I mean, Abram seems to be turning out very well because of this. Something that I was not aware of is that it mentions camels here. I had always thought of camels as being pretty normal in that day and age, but apparently they were not as common as all that. And to have camels at all, to even have one camel, to have camels was a sign of great wealth because of how rare and uncommon they were, especially all the way over in Egypt. And I mean, it just goes to show the level that he's being blessed with here. But I want you to notice how this is going to affect him later on. This is most likely when they acquire Hagar. Hagar is an Egyptian maidservant. Where did they get an Egyptian maidservant? The only time they were in Egypt is here. Before then, they've been traveling all through the north. It doesn't seem like they would have encountered any Egyptian slaves in that region. And here we have them receiving Egyptian slaves. It kind of makes sense. That's the first problem that is going to stem from this. This is also where Lot develops kind of a taste for the land of Egypt and the wonderful things that it includes. And if you take a look in chapter 13, verse 10, it says, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan that was well watered everywhere. Way better than the Negev, for sure. And this is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, the Garden of Eden, and like the land of Egypt, as you go toward Zoar. Oh, interesting. And where does Lot choose to go in this next chapter? Well, we know he's going to choose to go toward that land. Well, maybe it's because he got a taste of that while he was in Egypt. He got a taste of the temptation while he was there, and look where it takes him. The third result of this is he gets all these riches. And on the one hand, we say, it's amazing that God is still blessing him despite all these things. But I wonder if those riches were really a blessing. Those riches cause him multiple conflicts in the land of Canaan. It's part of what causes the conflict he has with Lot, first of all. It causes conflicts with the Canaanites and the Hittites. They know he's a rich man, and they con him a few times in order to get more money out of him. His wealth is so vast, he can't find a place to live. As a result of these riches, his descendants, his sons, his grandsons, are going to fight over the blessing of the inheritance. These things may seem like a blessing. They might seem like a good thing in the moment. And I'm sure he's thinking, wow, I can't believe this worked out. I can't believe my plan worked. Look. Man, I knew I was making the right decision as Pharaoh's servants shepherd more goats and sheep to him in exchange for Sarah. But it all comes crashing down a little bit when God strikes Pharaoh and his household with some kind of plague. It says, the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, and I took her for myself as a wife? So now here's your wife, take her, go! Kind of like how the later Pharaoh is going to push the children of Israel out. This Pharaoh pushes Abram and Sarah out. He says, I don't want you here. You have not brought anything but evil upon me. What did God tell Abram he was supposed to do? What was part of the blessing that God made to Abram? I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Abram is supposed to be a blessing. He's supposed to bring good things upon people, and as are his descendants. And here he is bringing a curse upon the Egyptians. He's doing exactly the opposite. And instead of receiving more blessings from God, as we're going to see in later parts of Abraham's life, he's receiving rebuke from a pagan king. It takes a pagan king to rebuke him. That's how low his faith is right now. It's so low that the pagans are correcting him. I wonder if sometimes our faith isn't so low that the pagans are correcting us. And that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for Abraham. It's embarrassing to us. When someone who is not a Christian, someone who does not live to the high standards that we hold ourselves to, has to come along and correct us, has to tell us, why are you acting the way you're acting? Why are you so mean? Why do you use your tongue in such hurtful ways? Why are you so inconsiderate? Why are you so unloving sometimes? It's embarrassing. that they should correct us. And Abram leaves. That's what it takes. That's what it takes for him to return to God. In chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, Abram finally does what he should have done to begin with. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev. He goes back into the land of Canaan. He, his wife, all belonged to him, and Lot with him. And we receive this comment again, just to remind us. We talk about Abraham being a rich man. It seems this is when he became a rich man. It does not seem that he was a rich man when he left Ur, or not as rich, certainly not as rich as he is now. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel. He goes back into the center of Canaan to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. He finally learned his lesson. He finally comes back to the land to live in it. And we see that he worships again to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. The entire time he's in Egypt, we don't see him praying. We don't see him worshiping God. We don't see God coming down and speaking to him. We don't see him receiving blessings. He receives riches, but those riches aren't a blessing. God never left him, but there's definitely a little bit of a gap in their relationship. God didn't retract all those promises he had previously made, but they weren't furthered during this time. When we go through these spiritual lapses, God doesn't abandon us. He waits there patiently for us to return. But there might be consequences. We're going to look back on those times and really wish we had just stayed faithful in the first place. Things really would have been a lot easier. But God doesn't give up. God doesn't leave Abraham. He continues to take care of him. And when Abraham finally gets his head back screwed on straight, God is there to receive his worship and to continue to take care of him and bless him in the land. I know that these times, these lapses, probably occur more than we want them to. We want them to never happen, but they do. And I want you to know that God is waiting for you. He's waiting for you patiently, and he asks that you come back to him and you return to worship him, to pray to him, to study his word, and to draw close to him for all your doings and your sayings. If you have any need, please come while we stand.